Whatever question you get, the writing structure remains the same. It's just the information that you include that's different from question to question. So there has to be a clear progression in how you write the answers. You can't just haphazardly write the information you see. There has to be a connection between what you're... One of these 6 types of questions are what you're going to get for your IELTS writing task 1. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Shashan Dias, and in this video we are going to look at an IELTS writing task 1 answer for academic test takers. Now when you take the academic test, there are 6 types of questions that you can get: a line graph, a bar chart, a pie chart, a table, a process, a map. One of these 6 types of questions are what you're going to get for your IELTS writing task 1. Whatever question you get, the writing structure remains the same. It's just the information that you include that's different from question to question. So in this video, we are going to focus specifically on the overall structure of writing task 1, how long it takes to write an answer, what is the marking criteria. We'll discuss as an overview what you need to know about writing task 1. And at the same time, we are also going to take a line graph. In this particular video, we are only going to focus on a line graph, and then we are going to discuss how to write an answer that will get you a high band score. Alright, so when we talk about writing task 1, here are a few things that you have to know. One of the first things that you have to know is the time limit. You have only 20 minutes to write this answer. Will they stop you when you get to 20 minutes? Can't you write once you get to 20 minutes? No, there is nothing like that. They won't stop you. The examiner will not ask you to stop. But you have to make a conscious decision and stop when you get to 20 minutes. What is the reason for this? Well, that's very simple. If you spend more than 20 minutes on task 1, there is an 80 to 90% chance that you will run out of time for your task 2 answer. You need to have at least 40 minutes for your task 2 answer. So if you take anything more than 20 minutes from your part 1, then you're going to run out of time for your part 2. Therefore, you need to strictly time yourself and not use a single second more than 20 minutes. Then your minimum word count is 150 words. This is what has been recommended by the IELTS examination, but you can't just stick to 150. 150 is the bare minimum. Obviously, you can't write less than 150, but writing just 150 or 155 won't show that you have a good vocabulary, that you have what it takes to go for a high band score, that you're not descriptive enough. If you just write 150 to 160 words, it's not the ideal word count for a high band score. If you're looking to get anywhere above 6.57 or above, ideally you should write about 175 to 200 words. Because when you write according to the structure and when you incorporate all the key information into your body paragraphs, that's typically how long it would take or how many words you would have to write. Okay, that doesn't mean if you write 155, you're never going to get a band 7. That's not what I mean. But your chances of going for a high band score are more likely if your word count is between 175 to 200 words. Can you write more than 200? Absolutely. But again, pay attention to the time. If you're taking more than 20 minutes to write more than 200 words, then don't compromise on the time. Timing is key when it comes to the writing test. So ideally 200 words is what we can manage in about 15 to 20 minutes. So that is about how much you have to write. The third point to remember is that you should never include any personal opinions when it comes to writing task 1. But if you look at writing task 2, and we've discussed the structure here before, we focused predominantly on our opinions. All right, things that we predict will happen. We got really creative with part 2 answers. But with part 1, we should not be creative at all. In a sense of we should not have our own ideas. It should always be a description or a report of what has already been given on that diagram. For example, if you have a line chart, you should not write your opinions or your views on the line chart. You should only describe what you see on that specific line graph. You should basically write a report on what you see. That's it. There's nothing more, there's nothing less. All you have to do is write a report. Alright, next we move on to the marking criteria of writing task 1. Now, very similar to writing task 2, we have 4 criteria that will decide whether you're going to get a high band score or not at the IELTS exam. You have task achievement, that is the first marking criteria. Then you have lexical resources, that's the second. Then you have grammatical range and accuracy. And finally, you have coherence and cohesion. All right. Task achievement is basically the content that you write. Have you included the key pieces of information that gives the examiner a comprehensive report about the specific diagram? Have you included all the key points that the examiner needs to get a clear understanding of the diagram by reading your report? This is what they expect in task achievement. Basically, just think of it like this. If the examiner can visualize the diagram by looking at your report, that means you have achieved task achievement, or you can get the full amount of marks for task achievement. Because if your content is comprehensive and detailed, it gives a good idea about the diagram. That means you have succeeded in this task achievement marking criteria. Next, lexical resources. You already know that lexical resources is the vocabulary that you use. Have you repeated the same vocabulary again and again and again? Or have you differentiated and used good synonyms so that you have been able to show the examiner that you're not limited with the vocabulary that you're using. Instead, you have a wide range of vocabulary that you can use. Grammatical range and accuracy. Are you using correct grammar? Are you using comprehensive structures, complex structures in grammar? Have you spelt your words correctly? Have you used proper grammatical structures? All of these things will be tested when it comes to grammatical range and accuracy. Finally, coherence and cohesion. Coherence is the logical flow between your paragraphs. So for your paragraphs to flow from one point to another, there has to be a logical flow. There has to be an overall structure. This is what coherence means. Cohesion is the flow from point to point. Basically, the flow from each sentence to another. All right. So there has to be a clear progression in how you write the answers. You can't just haphazardly write the information you see. There has to be a connection between what you are writing. All right. So overall, there has to be a structure, and then each point has to be connected to one another. This is coherence and cohesion. So now you have an understanding about the marking criteria that you need for part 1. Okay, so the next thing is the answer structure. You need to first start with a good introduction. What do you include in an introduction? Essentially, what you should do is you should paraphrase the question and include all the headings that you see in the graph. Now, if you take this question, for example, the question says, the charts below show the changes of ownership of electrical appliances and the amount of time spent doing housework in households in one country between 1920 and 2019. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Now, in the question itself, all the major headings have been included. The percentage of households with electrical appliances, the number of hours of housework per week per household from 1920 to 2019. You also have the number of hours, the percentage of households, the hours per week, and the electrical appliances, which are the washing machines, the refrigerators, and vacuum cleaners. Now, with the exception of the names of the electrical appliances, all the other headings have been included in the question itself. So when you're paraphrasing the question in order to write your introduction, you can either simply paraphrase the question without including the detailed names of the electrical appliances, or if you want to give a more comprehensive answer, you can include the names of the electrical appliances as well. Will it make a difference if you include the names of the electrical appliances? Well, not really. Regardless of whether you simply paraphrase the question or whether you look at all the headings and include all of them in your introduction, you'd still get a high band score depending on the vocabulary that you use and how well you paraphrase your answer. The second step, or the second part of your answer, should be the overview. Now, if you just mechanically report the information, that is, if you show the examiner that all you're doing is describing a picture, you're just describing what you see and not doing it with a proper understanding of the overall idea of that particular diagram, you will definitely lose marks. In order to go for a band 6 or above, you need to write an overview to your answer. What is an overview? The overview is an overall idea of that particular chart or diagram. You need to look at that diagram as a whole. You need to look at that chart as a whole and give an overall idea. This should not include any specific numbers, any specific years. It doesn't have to include specific data or information. It just needs to give the overall idea of that report. When the examiner reads your overview, he or she needs to understand that you have got a clear understanding of the conclusion, of the overview of that particular diagram or chart. All right. So that is the overview. So once you have written your introduction, you need to write your overview. Then you go on to write your body paragraphs. Now, you don't necessarily have to write 2 or 3 body paragraphs. One body paragraph covering all the key information would be more than enough. But if you want to, you can segregate this into 2 body paragraphs and formulate your answer. Do you need a conclusion? No. Like I told you, the overview is basically like your conclusion because you're talking about the overall idea, the overall conclusion that you can draw by looking at that particular diagram or chart. Therefore, you don't need to write a conclusion because you'll just be repeating the same information again. You'll just be repeating the same thing that you wrote in your overview in your conclusion. Therefore, writing a conclusion is not mandatory. If you want, you can include it, but you don't have to. All right. So introduction, overview, and then body paragraphs. That should be the structure of your answer. All right. So now let's go back to the question and see how we can write an answer in the proper structure, sticking to the marking criteria. All right. So this is the question. We read the question already, but let's read it again. The charts below show the changes in ownership of electrical appliances and the amount of time spent doing housework in households in one country between 1920 and 2019. Now, if you take a look at this graph, I already told you that in the introduction, they don't have the names of the electrical appliances. So when we are writing our introduction, in the example, I have written the names of the electrical appliances, but if you don't want to write this, you can omit it. Since it's not a very important piece of information, it can easily be elaborated in the body paragraph and it's not necessary to be marked in the introduction. But think, for example, if you were talking about a metric. For example, if a measurement was measured in metric tons or kilometers, and if that piece of information was not included in the question, then you need to include that in the introduction because things like units are very important. and they are key pieces of information. Now in this case, if you look at the introduction, the provided line graphs illustrate changes in the weekly hours dedicated to household work by households in a specific country during a period of a century from 1920 to 2019, with a focus on the ownership of electrical appliances like washing machines, refrigerators, and vacuum cleaners. Now, right after the introduction, I already told you that you need to include an overview. So you can write it in the introductory paragraph itself, or like I have written, you can write it as a separate line. Overall, the data indicates a negative correlation between appliance ownership and the time spent on household chores. Now you can see I have not included any figures, I have not included any years. That specific information does not matter in your overview. What they want in your overview is an overall idea of the chart or graph that you are writing a report about. So in this case, when the number of electrical appliances increased over a period of 100 years, the amount of time that a person spent doing household work, it gradually decreased. Because logically, even if you think about it, when you have a washing machine at home, you don't have to stay outside near your tap and wash all the clothes. You just put it into the washing machine and then you put it into the dryer and you put it out to dry. So the number of hours that you spend working naturally decreases. Alright, so we don't have to think logically, but what I'm saying is when you look at the correlation, you can see that it's negative. One thing is going up and the other is going down. So we call this a negative correlation. So that's what we have written in our overview. You would also see the cohesive device overall. Alright, now since you're just writing one report anyway, see at the exam you're just going to write one report. So if you just use the word overall and if you just know that, that's going to be perfectly fine. So every time you write an overview, you can use the word overall to clearly indicate to the examiner that the overview is what you are writing. So now when we go to the body paragraph, we can see in 1920, households allocated half of their weekly working hours to household work, reaching its peak. During this period, ownership of electrical appliances stood at its lowest, with refrigerators at 0%, vacuum cleaners at 30%, and washing machines being present in 4 in 10 houses. However, between 1920 and 1980, refrigerator ownership experienced a remarkable increase from 0% to 100% and remained stable for the next 40 years. Vacuum cleaners were also found in every house, but only from the year 2000, having grown from less than a third in 1920 to being present in all households by 2000. Washing machine ownership, on the other hand, saw a moderate rise of 30% from 1920 to 1960, followed immediately by a slight dip of 10% over the next 20 years. However, it resumed stable growth once again from 1980 to 2000, resulting in it being found in 3/4 of households. Alright, so that was our first body paragraph, and you can see we predominantly covered the first graph. We made sure to note all the trends, whether there were increases, whether there were decreases, and we made it a consistent point to not repeat the same words over and over again. So for example, if you look at that first paragraph, you can see, so we start off by mentioning electrical appliances. We say that this was at its lowest. And then when we talk about an increase, we don't just say it increased, we say it had a remarkable increase. And then it remained stable. Alright, it remained in the same position. It remained stable for the next 40 years. Then again, we are not saying it increased, we are saying having grown from less than a third. When we are talking about vacuum cleaners, we don't say it just increased, we are saying it has grown from less than a third to being present in all households. Then when we talk about washing machines, again it has increased, but we are not saying the word increase, we are saying there was a moderate rise. There was a moderate rise. Alright. Then when we talk about decreasing, we're not saying it decreased by 10%, we're saying there was a slight dip, right? Then again, when we come to talking about an increase, we're talking about a stable growth. We're saying it resumed stable growth, all right? So we need to use different words like this to showcase our vocabulary. This is how we get marks for lexical resources. Now, if you're having trouble finding words or finding synonyms, we have a video course available for you along with a free information bank that includes all the vocabulary that you need to write better for academic writing task 1. So if you want to purchase our video course and get the information bank free of charge, you can just text the number below on WhatsApp and get access to that immediately. Alright, now we move on to the second body paragraph, and here it's very short. All we have said is, despite the substantial surge in appliance ownership, the weekly hours dedicated to household work consistently decreased, witnessing a 40% reduction over the century. Now again, if you look here, instead of saying a big increase, we have said a substantial surge, and then we have said consistently decreased, and then we are talking about a 40% reduction. All right, so you can see we have used different words at different places. Even the percentages aren't the same. Now if you look at the first line of the first body paragraph, we have said households allocated half of their weekly working hours to household work. Now we could have easily said 50%, but no, we are using a different word. We are saying half. All right, then if you look at vacuum cleaners, instead of saying vacuum cleaners were at 100%, we are starting by saying vacuum cleaners were also found in every house only from the year 2000. So we're not saying it was at 100% in the year 2000, we're saying it was found in every house, because that's what 100% means. Having grown from just less than a third. Now what is a third? A third is 33%. So we are saying having grown from just less than a third. All right, so it could be 32%, 31%, 30%, but now when you look at the graph, you know it's 30%, but we are saying it's just less than a third instead of saying 30%. All right, to being present in all households. So you get the idea. You can't use the same vocabulary over and over again. Wherever possible, you need to try and use synonyms. You need to try and use quality vocabulary to try and get the best possible mark. The other thing that you should note is that in every sentence that we have written in the body paragraph, you can see that there is a percentage, there is a year, there is also a direction. All right, a percentage like 40%, 30%, or we have said a half, less than a third, present in all houses. Some form of number is present in every sentence. There is also a year present in every sentence. We have said either from 1920 to 1960, just in 1980, in the year 2000, whatever. There is always a year present. And finally, there is always a direction. A direction means there has been an increase or a decrease. It has been stable. So what you have to understand is when we are writing answers for line graphs, bar charts, pie charts, or tables, any of these 4 types of charts where you have numbers, where you have percentages, you need to include all 3 of these things in every possible sentence. You need to have percentages, you need to have years, you need to have directions. Okay, so you already know what percentages or numbers, basically. You know what numbers are, you know what years are. Direction means if there is an increase or a decrease, what has happened to that number. This is a mark of a good report, because the idea of a report is that the examiner should be able to get a clear understanding of the graph without looking at the graph. Do you understand what I mean? So basically, if the examiner doesn't understand what the graph is about when he reads your report, that means you have failed. That means you have not written up to the point. So the examiner should be able to visualize the graph in his head when he reads your answer. That should be your goal. So for that, obviously, you should include all the key pieces of information, because if you don't have the key pieces of information, the examiner will not understand what the graph is about. And if he doesn't, your band score is going to be low. All right. So for task achievement, all the key pieces of information should be included. For lexical resources, you should have good quality words and synonyms. For grammatical range and accuracy, you can see that we have used a lot of complex sentences. We haven't just written simple sentences. For example, if we look at the vacuum cleaner sentence, vacuum cleaners were also found in every house, but only from the year 2000. Having grown from just less than a third in 1920 to being present in all households by 2000. Now we could have written this sentence in simple format like this. Vacuum cleaners were found in every house from the year 2000, full stop. It had grown from less than a third in 1920 to being present in all households by the year 2000, full stop. So that's two different sentences we have connected to create a complex structure. Alright, so similarly, don't just write simple sentences, try to use connecting words, try to use conjunctions wherever possible, try to use cohesive devices. For example, we have used cohesive devices like during this period, however, on the other hand, despite this. So words like this we have used to show the connection between every sentence or every idea that we have written. Alright. And you can see at the end, we have not given a conclusion because a conclusion would be simply a repetition of our overview. So a conclusion is not necessary. You can end your answer with just your second body paragraph and you can leave it at that. Alright, now I hope you got a clear understanding of how to write a part 1 answer for your academic writing exam. Now here we only discussed about a line graph, but in the coming videos we will be discussing other types of questions as well. So make sure to subscribe to our channel, comment on the areas that you're finding difficult so that we can make videos depending on what you need, alright, what you're finding difficult for the exam. So make sure to share it with your friends, leave a like and click the notification bell so that when we put out a new video, you're the first to be informed. Aside from that, if you would also like to enroll in our 10-day IELTS program, where you get to work with us face-to-face and clarify any doubts or problems that you may have, make sure to drop a text on the number below. And if you would also like to get access to our video course and information bank, you can still text the number below and get information about all our programs. So till our next video, keep practicing.